Man of Steel was released in 2013, a whole 7 years after we had the lackluster Superman Returns. Finally, we were getting the Superman movie we had all wanted for so long, featuring some villains that we had already seen Christopher Reeve go up against in Superman 2. But let's agree that Richard Donner's Superman, although iconic and great, is now a product of his time. And in Man of Steel we would finally see Superman unleashed. We would see him use his powers like never before, with the help of some groundbreaking CGI special effects. And a story written for a modern audience. This version of Superman would be very earnest and grounded in the real world, but with some truly awesome action sequences. But was it a good movie? Well, yeah, I actually think it was. I actually like this movie a lot. I think it's fantastic, but I do also think that it has its flaws. So in today's video I thought I'd go through what I like about Man of Steel and what I dislike. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay, so first of all I want to talk about the casting of this movie. It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. I don't think there is any actor in this movie that I dislike. Everyone fits perfectly, including Russell Crowe, Amy Adams, Kevin Costner, Diane Lane, Michael Shannon, Lawrence Fishburne. All of them are brilliant in this movie. In fact, I could go through every single cast member in this movie and I can say without a shadow of a doubt that everyone is just perfectly cast. But casting Henry Cavill as Superman was just a stroke of genius in my humble opinion. He is Superman. And I'm a massive Chris Reeve fan. I always have been, I always will be. Chris Reeve will always be Superman in my eyes. And now, so is Henry Cavill. In my opinion, he kind of shares the spotlight with Chris Reeve. I think Henry Cavill just looks the part. He looks like Superman from the comics that I read as a child. It's uncanny in many ways, as though he was pulled from the page. And I was sold from the first time I saw the first promo shot of Superman of Henry Cavill in the suit in front of a damaged safe. I was just absolutely blown away by how much he actually looked like Superman. And then of course after actually seeing Henry Cavill play Superman after I'd seen the movie, it cemented my opinion. Especially learning the passion that Henry Cavill also had for the character. It's just a shame that we did not get a Man of Steel 2.
I genuinely care about this character. There's something about this character which I have now come to love and be very protective over.
The villains. Okay, the villains. All of the bad guy Kryptonians in this movie are brilliant. They are mean as hell, and I especially like Fiora and how the actress portrays her as a ruthless warrior who is totally dedicated to General Zod, played by Michael Shannon, who is superb, absolutely superb. And what I like the best about his portrayal is that Zod believes that he is a good guy, and his motivations are to save his race, to save his people. After all, that is what he has been engineered to do.
I exist only to protect Krypton. That is the sole purpose for which I was born.
I absolutely love it when villains in movies actually think that they are in the right. It makes them more interesting than just a mustache twirling villain. It gives the character more depth, and even though he's trying to wipe out the human race, you do kind of understand where he's coming from and why he feels like he has to do this. The Kents. Okay, so first of all, I just want to say that Kevin Costner and Diane Lane play the Kents brilliantly. They make a convincing couple for what little screen time they actually share together. And I love the flashback scenes where we get to see Clark growing up and struggling with his powers. But he has the support of his parents, with Martha being the nurturing mother, whilst Jonathan is constantly warning Clark to keep his powers a secret. But it's all done out of love and at his heart, and the actors make you feel the love that they actually feel for Clark in the movie. I really like the scene in the movie where Martha Kent is speaking words of comfort to Clark, who has locked himself inside of a school closet due to his powers becoming too much for him to handle. But I think my absolute favourite scene is between Jonathan and Clark. In a scene where Jonathan shows Clark the ship that they found him in, and when young Clark discovers that he is from another world, he says this to his father.
Can I just keep pretending I'm your son?
You are my son.
It's such an emotionally charged scene, and it gets me every single time, and it's the way Costner actually delivers a line, "You are my son," that gives it that punch in the heart. That feeling that you have when he delivers that line is phenomenal. He really does do so much with such little words. But there are some scenes with Jonathan Kent that I am not a fan of, and we will come back to those later. Superman's powers. Okay, so in this movie, Superman is of course very powerful, godlike you might say, but he also does have his limitations, and I like that. For example, when he's holding up the collapsing oil rig, you can see that he's actually struggling as the steel bends beneath his feet. And then when the rig collapses, we see Clark floating beneath the water, and you get the impression that he is semi-unconscious, as though it took it out of him. So he has limitations, or at least it's hinted at, and I think Superman is more of an interesting character when he is not overpowered. He is an incredibly hard character to write for when he can basically do anything. I remember reading a comic book as a kid where Superman actually pulled the planet Earth out of the way of a meteor. He was basically a god, and if he can move a planet, then there's nothing he can't do, and it makes it so hard to write a story for him. Even in the PlayStation 2 game Superman Returns, it was a city that had the health bar, not Superman. What I also love about this movie is the way that Superman's powers are presented visually with the way he manipulates gravity, the little stones that rise from the ground just before he takes flight, and the way his heat vision is seen within his own skull, and it actually seems to affect him for a moment, messing with his vision. I thought this was a really neat touch. And of course, with the inclusion of some great green screen effects and CGI, the flying scenes are really effective and better than ever before. And it's not only his powers I like, but his weaknesses, especially the part on board Zod's ship where Superman is weakened by the artificial Kryptonian atmosphere. I think that was a good touch instead of going down the kryptonite route like usual. Likewise, I also like the fact that Superman had to learn how to control his powers, and so did Zod and his crew when they come to Earth. And that gives Superman the edge he needs against the villains. The action scenes are mind-blowing and full-on, and the movie hardly gives you a rest from the first time that Superman faces up to Zod until the finale of the movie. Now, I remember watching this movie at the IMAX theatre and feeling bewildered when I actually came out because of the constant action scenes accompanied by the booming audio. It was almost too much, but totally awesome. The suit. Now, I like the idea in this movie that the Fortress of Solitude is a 2,000-year-old crashed Kryptonian ship. I don't love everything about this, which I will get into a little bit later, but what I'd like is that the ship actually makes Superman's suit, which makes way more sense than his mother making it for him.
Cool costume.
Thanks. My mom made it for me.
The Kryptonian suit is somewhat indestructible, so it explains why it can take more damage. So I always had issues with the idea of Martha successfully sewing the suit with her sewing kit. Sewing a suit that can withstand so much damage always troubled me, but I feel having the ship provide the suit makes so much more sense. Lois Lane. Now, Lois Lane in this movie is finally played right, and she actually discovers that Clark was an alien long before she sees him in the suit. She actually does some investigative reporting in this movie, which leads her back to the Kent farm, and then learning that Clark is the alien that she's been looking for. At this point, he's not actually Superman. Now, in the comics and the cartoons and TV shows, it always irritated me how she couldn't get past the glasses, especially after spending so much time with both Clark and with Superman. Her character is supposed to be as sharp as they come, and in this movie, she is just that. She discovers that Clark is Superman right from the beginning, and I think that is fantastic.
Uncanny how Superman turns up just when you need him.
I didn't even get a chance to thank him.
Okay, so I think we've established that I do actually like this movie. We've talked about the good points, now let's talk about the bad points. Okay, so here is what I did not like about Man of Steel, or at least what I had little tiny problems with, and how I think it could have been improved. First of all, Krypton. Now, I'm a little bit torn on what I'm about to say, because the design of Krypton I actually like. It's unlike anything we have seen before, it's visually stunning, but at the same time it's underwhelming. Don't get me wrong, it looks good, it looks really good, and it reimagines a different world really well. But in some ways, it also feels very rocky and barren, and even the set pieces are very minimal. It just seems a little odd to see this advanced civilization dwelling in rocky caves. I prefer Krypton to look a little more like a futuristic Earth would look. Of course, with its own uniqueness to it. I'm a fan of the way Krypton was portrayed in Superman the Animated Series and some comic books, with Krypton looking more lived in, like there's actually people down there going about their everyday lives, like there's a society. And some of you might disagree with me on this one, but I can't help but think that they took inspiration from Avatar when designing Krypton, especially with Jor-El flying on that strange winged creature. Also, some of the architecture of Krypton looks a little phallic. Especially the pods that take Zod and his companions up to the Phantom Zone ship. They straight up look like massive dicks, and apparently this was done on purpose. I was also not a massive fan of the way Kryptonians make video calls. It's kind of like a silver nanotech that can form objects, and live chats, like a Skype call, that looks like a pin art frame. Later on in the movie, Jor-El talks to Clark in the form of a hologram, a perfect hologram that looks like actual flesh and blood, so why wouldn't the Kryptonians use this way of communication instead of this weird pin art frame communication? But I do like how the pin art frame tech actually makes up objects like the Kryptonian key and such. I think that was a really cool element. The Phantom Zone. Okay, so it's not really the Phantom Zone I have a problem with. It's the way the villains are transported into the Phantom Zone that I'm not a fan of. You see, they send Zod and their crew up to the Phantom Zone for their crimes, and they send them up there in penis pods. And these pods take them up to a fully functional ship that then takes them safely into the Phantom Zone where they are safe. And when Krypton does explode, they are freed from the Phantom Zone with a fully functional ship capable of space travel. And then they basically have everything they need, and it seems a little convenient. Like convenient writing. Okay, don't get me wrong, I'm glad that they didn't do the glass square Phantom Zone that was just conveniently floating past Earth like in Superman 2. But why not send them up to the Phantom Zone by using the Phantom Zone projector, which would not have required a spaceship, that they can conveniently use when they escape. Aggressive trucker. Okay, so there's a scene where we see Clark working in a bar whilst travelling around the world, trying to find answers about who he is. It's in this bar that we have an annoying trucker causing trouble and being a jerk with the waitress, so Clark steps in to defend her and asks the trucker to stop, only to be humiliated by the trucker who pours his beer over Clark's head, and then tries to push him, but it's like pushing a brick wall. I love this scene, it's great, and I love the restraint that Clark has. To just take the humiliation and walk away, that to me is Superman. He could have squashed this guy like a bug, but chose not to. He turned the other cheek. He was the bigger man. But in a later scene, as the trucker leaves the bar, we see that Clark has totally mangled the guy's truck. And in my opinion, this isn't something Superman would do. It's overkill and out of character. Also, the fact that he did it without drawing attention to anyone is just amazing. And I know, in Superman 2 we see Christopher Reeve return to the diner where he was beaten up by the guy earlier on in the movie and teaches him a lesson, but I feel in Man of Steel they just take it a tad too far. The Kryptonian scout ship. The 2,000-year-old Kryptonian scout ship that becomes a Fortress of Solitude, I thought was actually a great idea. I'm not a fan of how it was written into the movie, but I thought it was a great idea. The fact that it has been buried underneath the ice for so long is great, but the way that it was found by the military at the right time, and Clark just so happens to be in the right place at the right time to hear about it, all seems a little far-fetched to me. For one, what are the chances of the ship being found? It's very slim. And did Jor-El just presume that his son would find this ancient ship and activate his hologram upon the ship without giving him any knowledge whatsoever of its whereabouts? I just think this is such a stretch. Also, this is the only way that Clark can activate Jor-El with his Kryptonian key on board the scout ship that has been buried for 2,000 years and just so happens to have been found. I mean, it's such a slim chance that he would come across this ship in the first place. Was Jor-El just presuming that he would find it? Was he just hoping that he would find this 2,000-year-old ship? Okay, so here's how I think it would have worked better. If they simply had the key activate a hologram of Jor-El on Clark's own pod on the Kent farm, wouldn't that make more sense to actually allow his own pod to activate Jor-El's hologram? Wouldn't it make more sense that this is what Jor-El intended in the first place? To actually give Kal-El a way to activate the key and not just hope that he finds this 2,000-year-old spaceship that I had no knowledge of. The animated series actually did it this way, where they had Clark activate Jor-El on his own pod on the Kent farm, and it just makes more sense. If they'd have gone down this route, then Jor-El could have informed Clark of the crashed Kryptonian scout ship buried deep in the ice, which could be his Fortress of Solitude, and give him coordinates to where it was. This way, the inclusion of the military would not be necessary, and he could have left with the ship and no one would have known any better, and he would truly have had his Fortress of Solitude. I'm also not fond of the idea that Zod only came to Earth because Clark activated the scout ship, alerting the villains of his whereabouts. So, in a way, it's kind of Clark's fault that the Kryptonians attack Earth, and I hate that. I absolutely hate that.
We detected a distress beacon, which you triggered when you accessed the ancient scout ship.
You led us here, Cap.
The world fears Superman in this movie, so in my opinion, he needs to save humanity to be trusted. And he does, but if it wasn't for him, Zod would not have found Earth in the first place. I think it would have just been better if Zod just knew where Earth was, if he knew that it was a planet that he could terraform, and he knew of its location in the universe, taking the blame away from Superman. I just hate how all the mayhem that follows in the movie, all the deaths, is literally because Clark activated the ship. Even if he had no idea that he would alert Zod, it is still a bit of an annoyance. Okay, so far I've had little gripes with the movie, little things that I can forgive. But the following are my biggest gripes with this movie. Jonathan Kent's death. The way Jonathan Kent dies in this movie is so silly. So in this scene, Jonathan and Martha and Clark find themselves in the path of a tornado, a big one, and Jonathan insists that Clark does not help. Why? And whilst Jonathan is rescuing the family dog from the truck, he gets his foot trapped and manages to get loose, but is too injured to get back to safety as a tornado approaches. Clark goes to rescue his father and Jonathan tells him to stay back, basically let him die. And then the tornado takes him. It's such an unnecessary death, and it was pointless in my opinion. I get it, Jonathan is trying to protect his son, and I must admit Cavill's cry is emotional, and it's sad no matter how silly the scene is, but the main issue I have with this death is that it was completely avoidable. Clark could have saved him, and no one would have known any better. Now, compare this to the death of Pa Kent in Richard Donner's Superman movie. Now, in this scene, Jonathan tells Clark the importance of hiding his abilities and that he believes that his son is here for a reason, all the same values Kevin Costner's Jonathan Kent delivered. But in Donner's version, Jonathan Kent dies of a heart attack on his farm with his family, and no matter how powerful Clark is, no matter how amazing his abilities are, he can't save his father from a heart attack.
All those things I can do, all those powers. And I couldn't even save him.
We get the same message with a more powerful death scene instead of a massive CGI disaster. It's more real and more impactful and just works so much better. The death toll. Okay, so this I'm kind of torn with. I kind of get it, that if the events of this movie happened in the real world, people would most definitely die. So for that reason, I like that, and I like that it's realistic. Superman cannot save everybody, and I think it's perfect for a modern day superhero movie to get that point across. However, I didn't like a certain scene where Superman brings down the Kryptonian scout ship that Zod has stolen and is flying over the city. In this scene, Superman uses his heat vision from inside the ship and sends it crashing down into skyscrapers, no doubt killing so many people, both in the buildings and on the ground. It's just reckless. Then there's the big fight scene between Zod and Superman at the end of the movie in what's left of the fallen metropolis that has been flattened by the world engine. And then there's the big fight between Zod and Superman at the end of the movie in what's left of the fallen metropolis that has been flattened by the world engine that Zod unleashes on the planet to terraform it. But in this scene, Zod and Superman punch each other all over what is left of Metropolis, bringing even more skyscrapers tumbling down to the ground. Now, I'm not saying that these scenes are not awesome, because they are. Remember, I actually like this movie, I like it a lot, but I had a problem with Superman being so reckless. This, for me, is not what Superman would do. He would not fight in the city, he would take the fight elsewhere, like in the desert or something. As Chris Reeves' Superman did in Superman 2. He knew he couldn't fight in the city without casualties, so he fled, knowing that they would follow. I will say this, I suppose Zack Snyder was going for a real world situation where if this did happen in the real world, there would definitely be fatalities, and Superman just cannot save everyone because it's more realistic this way, and I admire the movie for that reason. Like I said before, this is a Superman fight scene unlike anything we have ever seen before from any other movie. It's amazing, but I just wish they showed Superman actually trying to take the fight elsewhere. Even when they went up into space, Superman brings Zod straight back down onto the city. It's just not what Superman would do, in my opinion. It's the end of the fight that I really had a hard time accepting when I first watched this movie, when Superman breaks Zod's neck. I know Superman has killed when he's had to in the comic books, but it still did come as a shock. Why didn't he fly away with Zod? Why didn't he cover up Zod's eyes? Why didn't the family just simply move to the left? But like I said, this movie is somewhat grounded in reality. Maybe Superman had no option but to kill this unstoppable force. Or maybe the writer could have simply written a different outcome to this scene. Nevertheless, I do appreciate seeing how traumatised Superman was after he kills Zod. He really didn't want to do it, but in this story, he had to. He had no choice. For all the little gripes I have with Man of Steel, I really do appreciate it for what it is. In some ways, brutally realistic, you know, in a world where superpowered beings invade Earth. I think it tries to get across the point that Superman, as powerful as he is, cannot save everybody. Man of Steel is a non-stop action-packed thrill ride that never gives up, and Superman is played really, really well by Henry Cavill. There was once a time when I thought the one true Superman was Christopher Reeve, but now I truly believe that Cavill shares the spotlight, and for me, he is Superman.